No one expected this, not even his closest friends, not even his own family. The news came out of nowhere, shaking fans across the world and leaving an entire household in pieces. Malcolm Jamal Warner, the man millions had grown up watching as Theo Huxtable, was now facing the darkest chapter of his life. At first, the details were hidden. There were only whispers online, confusing headlines, and a lot of guessing. But let me tell you, what was happening behind those closed doors was far more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. His wife and children stayed completely silent. Not a single word, not a single post. And that silence, it said more than words ever could. People online started speculating. Some thought it was just a rumor. Others believed it was a private health issue. But here is the shocking part. The real story wasn't just tragic, it was soul-crushing. Insiders close to the family shared that everything changed in just one moment. Malcolm's home, usually calm, filled with music and laughter, had suddenly turned cold. Something terrible had happened, something no one was ready to talk about. But this is where it gets interesting. There were signs, quiet ones, that something was wrong. Just a week before the news broke, his wife posted a short message on her private Instagram. She wrote, "Hug your loved ones tighter. We never know when our last goodbye will come." At the time, people brushed it off. But now, after everything, it felt like she had known, like destiny had whispered a warning. Fans were desperate for answers. Social media was flooded with messages of concern, sadness, and confusion. But Malcolm didn't speak. He vanished from interviews, canceled all his projects, and even stopped answering calls. Those who knew him said he wasn't himself anymore. He would spend hours in silence, just walking back and forth in his backyard, sometimes talking to himself. And you won't believe what one neighbor said. They saw him standing by a tree late at night, whispering, "Why didn't I see it coming?" What made this story different? Malcolm had always been a private man. While others ran to the press when things went wrong, he always kept his life away from cameras. But even without words, people could feel his pain. His face was missing from red carpets, his voice disappeared from podcasts, and his music, silent. The bass guitar he loved so much sat untouched for days. Friends tried to check in, but he refused to talk. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't sleep. And then came the most painful detail of all. One of his closest friends shared that during a late night call, Malcolm finally broke down. His voice was barely there. And all he said was, "I failed them. I wasn't there when they needed me most." That one sentence crushed everyone who heard it, because no parent ever wants to feel like they failed their child. And that guilt, it stayed with him. But the craziest part, while Malcolm was sinking into his pain, his children were the ones holding him up, especially his daughter. She was just a young teen, but her strength was beyond her years. She started leaving tiny notes around the house, on his bathroom mirror, under his guitar, inside his shoes. Notes like, "I love you, Dad. We're going to be okay." Those simple messages slowly began to bring him back, bit by bit, word by word. And even though the world had no idea what was happening inside that home, something powerful was building up. The silence wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about something else. Something the family was preparing. A message that would soon break the internet and bring even the strongest fans to tears. Everything changed the morning the Warner family finally broke their silence. After days of silence and endless rumors, the world woke up to a single post on Malcolm Jamal Warner's verified Instagram account. No photos, no fancy edits, just a black background with white text. And at the top, 3 words that stop time: "We are shattered." It was raw, it was honest, and it was heartbreaking. Malcolm started the message by saying this was the hardest thing he had ever written. Harder than any acting role. Harder than any challenge he had faced in his life. Because this wasn't a performance, this was pain, this was loss, and this was real. He thanked the fans for their support, for the candles, flowers, and prayers. But then he said something that hit everyone deep. He wrote, "He wasn't just my son, he was my joy, my mirror, my legacy. I can't believe I'll never hear his laugh again." Those words cut through everything because now the truth was out. It wasn't a distant relative. It wasn't a rumor. Malcolm had lost his child, his own son. And the way he described him, it felt like reading a love letter wrapped in grief. His voice came through the words, and it shook people to their core. But here's where it got even more powerful. Malcolm didn't just share his pain, he also addressed the chaos happening online. He gently told people to stop spreading false stories. No accidents, no drama, no hidden scandals, just heartbreak. He said, "Please stop the rumors. We are already drowning in sorrow. Let us grieve in peace." That line made people pause. It reminded everyone that behind the name, behind the fame, was a father. A man who had just lost his son and was trying to breathe through the weight of it. But the most emotional part of the message, it came at the very end. The whole family signed off with a quote from Malcolm's late mother. A simple but powerful line, "We may break, but we will not disappear." That sentence went viral within minutes. People were reposting it, turning it into artwork, putting it in their bios. Some even got it tattooed because in those words, there was not just pain, but strength. It became a symbol of resilience for everyone who had ever faced loss. And then something happened that no one expected. Celebrities, fans, and even strangers from around the world came together in grief. Oprah posted a tribute. Viola Davis shared a prayer. Denzel Washington, Tyler Perry, and even Malcolm's former castmates from The Cosby Show posted emotional messages. It was no longer just Malcolm's tragedy. It had become a shared heartbreak. But the most unforgettable moment came just a few hours later. A short video clip surfaced online. It wasn't an official post, just a quick clip from a family friend. Malcolm was standing in front of a photo of his son, surrounded by candles. He didn't say a word. He just placed his hand over his heart and stood there, still, silent, shattered. And even without speaking, his pain filled the screen. That single moment made millions cry across the globe. But this is where the story took another turn, because the Warner family wasn't done. They weren't just grieving behind closed doors. They were planning something bigger, a memorial, a goodbye, but not just any farewell. What happened next would become one of the most emotional public moments in recent memory, and you won't believe how it unfolded. It was a warm Sunday afternoon in Los Angeles when the world stood still once again. The Warner family had announced a public memorial for Malcolm Jamal Warner's son, and the location alone said everything. Hollywood Forever Cemetery, a place where legends rest and memories never fade. But this wasn't about fame or spotlight. This was about closure, about honoring a life that ended far too soon. And let me tell you, what happened that day was unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Even hours before the gates opened, people had already lined the streets. Some came with flowers, others with candles, and many just stood in silence, holding on to pictures, signs, or memories. One sign read, "Gone too soon. You taught us love through your loss." Another simply said, "We cry with you, Malcolm." The crowd wasn't made up of just fans. It was a mix of friends, neighbors, industry giants, and strangers from across the country, all connected by one thing: heartbreak. As the memorial began, a string quartet played a soft version of Lean on Me, and the air turned heavy. Among the first to arrive were Malcolm's former castmates from The Cosby Show. Felicia Rashad, who played his on-screen mother, walked in quietly, tears in her eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone said everything. Others followed: Tempesty Bledsoe, Keshia Knight Pulliam, even a video message from a wheelchair-bound Bill Cosby was played. And the most touching part, None of them were there for press. They were there for Malcolm as a family. Then came the wave of celebrities: Oprah, Tyler Perry, Viola Davis, Taraji P. Henson, Will Smith, all stood together, not as stars, but as human beings. People watched in awe as Viola wiped tears from her face. Tyler Perry hugged Malcolm tightly, whispering something in his ear. There were no interviews, no cameras flashing, just stillness, just sorrow. But here is the part that truly shattered hearts. When Malcolm Jamal Warner stepped onto the stage, the entire crowd stood, not to applaud, but in complete respect. He wasn't wearing a suit and tie, just a simple black shirt, the top button undone, and a look of exhaustion on his face that said everything words couldn't. For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, and then, finally, he spoke. "I didn't come here today to talk about death," he said softly. "I came to talk about life, my son's life." He shared memories, beautiful, tender, everyday moments. How his son loved dinosaurs, how they wrote comic books together, how he used to hum lullabies to him that were once played during his Cosby Show days. He even told the audience how they had just started a new comic titled Super Theo, where the father and son duo saved the world. And then came the moment that broke everyone. Malcolm looked at a giant photo of his son projected behind him and said, "You may be gone from our arms, but you'll never be gone from our stories. You are my reason. You are my star." That's when the screen behind him changed. Slowly, the words of a journal entry written by his son at age 7 appeared. "When I grow up, I want to make the world smile." The crowd broke. Even the strongest people couldn't hold it in anymore. You could hear the sobs, see the tissues clutched in trembling hands, feel the pain in the air. It was no longer just a memorial. It was a moment of unity, of shared emotion. A global cry for a boy the world never knew, but somehow loved deeply. Then 44 white doves were released into the sky, one for every day his son had lived. And as the birds soared above the cemetery, a gospel choir began singing "Going Up Yonder." It wasn't just a song, it was a send-off, a blessing, a way to let go while still holding on. The entire service was live-streamed. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, thousands joined from all around the world. Within an hour, the hashtag #TheoForever was trending #1 worldwide. Fans were sharing their own stories of loss, their own moments of pain, and how Malcolm's words had helped them feel seen. But what makes this story different? It's not just the tragedy, it's the strength. It's how one man's heartbreak brought millions together, not through scandal or gossip, but through truth, love, and memory. Because as Viola Davis said after the memorial while hugging Malcolm tightly, this wasn't just a loss for you, Malcolm. It was a loss for all of us. But your courage has reminded us how to keep going with honesty, with vulnerability, and with power. And just when the world thought they had heard everything, another secret was about to surface, one hidden in the quietest moment of that final day. Something Malcolm found tucked away in his son's belongings, and you won't believe what it was. For days after the memorial, Malcolm Jamal Warner barely spoke. The world had wept with him, stood beside him, mourned with him. But once the flowers faded and the songs ended, the silence returned. Back inside his home, Malcolm found himself wandering through his son's room again, touching the toys, flipping through sketchbooks, staring at the empty bed. It was quiet, too quiet. And that's when he saw it. Tucked deep inside one of his son's favorite superhero books was a small, sealed envelope. On the front, written in wobbly little handwriting, were the words, "Open this when I'm not around." Malcolm froze. His hands shook. His heart dropped. He held the letter close to his chest for several minutes before he finally opened it. What he found inside would change everything. It wasn't just a letter. It was a hand-drawn comic strip colored in crayon, filled with love. The title, Me and Daddy Saved the World. In the comic, his son had drawn himself and Malcolm, flying through the sky wearing capes. They weren't fighting villains. They were spreading joy, hugging sad people, turning rain into sunshine. Each page was simple but powerful. And in the final panel, the son wrote, "If you're reading this, don't be sad. I'm still here, just invisible, but I'll always be your superhero." You won't believe how that one line broke Malcolm all over again. He fell to his knees right there in the room, sobbing. But this time, it was different. The pain was still there, but something else began to rise, a sense of peace. Because that letter wasn't just a goodbye, it was a message of strength, of love, of something beyond this world. It was as if his son had known somehow that his words would be needed later. From that moment on, Malcolm changed. Slowly, carefully, but clearly. He began eating again. He started playing music, softly at first, then with more feeling. He reached out to his friends, returned a few calls, even stepped back into his studio. And when people asked him how he was doing, he didn't fake a smile. He simply said, "I'm healing, one memory at a time." Then, just 1 week later, he posted again. This time, it wasn't a dark screen. It was a photo of his son's comic book and a caption that read, "My son may have left this world, but his light, oh, his light will burn inside me forever. Every role I take from now on, every word I speak will be in his name." That post went viral again. People across the world shared their own stories of loss, their own letters, their own healing. Malcolm had turned his pain into purpose, and in doing so, he had helped others begin their own healing too. But here's the craziest part. Just days after that post, Malcolm announced something no one expected. He had partnered with a children's charity to launch a foundation called the Super Theo Project. The mission? To provide creative outlets for kids dealing with grief through drawing, storytelling, and comic making. He said, my son used his imagination to spread joy. Now I want other kids to do the same. His story doesn't end with sadness. It begins again with purpose. What makes this story different? It's not just the loss, it's the transformation. Malcolm Jamal Warner didn't let grief destroy him. He let it shape him. He took the most painful moment of his life and turned it into a legacy. His son didn't disappear. His light didn't fade. It became something bigger. And that's how destiny took an unexpected turn. From silence to healing, from heartbreak to hope, from goodbye to forever.